I want to set the stage with one of the ways we kind of try to look at these issues. And this one in particular, I think is really important, Pepper. We were talking about it before. It's like, this requires us to dig a little deeper into the why and to try to understand. And one of the areas I want to get to is to talk about, why is this such a defensive topic and challenging? But to set the stage, let me share some national data that I don't think will surprise, but there's a few things that might be a little interesting. It's not surprising, I think, to anybody on this call that, as of right now, 81% of Americans believe that we're getting more divided, more and more divided. Now, I would argue that that division is far more perceptual than real when you get to the actual issues that we all care about as humans and as Americans. But our system has a lot of issues, that a lot of design factors, if you will, that are feeding that division, which we're going to be having another conversation in August about that in greater detail. But I want to show you that through an example of when, as a people, we come together and then we divide. If you look back to when COVID hit, this is just tracking, if I could focus you on the yellow and the purple line without getting too worried about all the number points. This goes back to March 2020, when something happened that we might all remember, of when the world changed and shut down overnight. With COVID, the yellow line is we were getting closer together, and similar to post 9/11, we kind of got a lot closer together. And then very quickly, you had things happening that summer. You had George Floyd, you had things, racial dynamics going on, while at the same time, a health issue became a partisan issue and states dealing with it in different ways. And then we went to this massive division of that purple line, which continued. Underneath that, we look a lot at societal values of like, is this something for you that's gotten worse or gotten better? And during that same time period, what's interesting is that as a people, our concern for others was getting higher and better during the early years of time of COVID, started to decline as we got into 2022. But tolerance and inclusiveness is below that line, meaning that there are more people saying that it was getting worse during that particular time. Also, when you look at some other societal values of freedom, security, and social order, those consistently were perceived as getting worse during the period of that pandemic. And I'm using that just as a microcosm of other things in society. And all of that was happening while we have low and lower trust in, increasingly lower trust in our institutions. This is just showing some of the data during that same time period with the government and with the media. Now, at the same time, one of the other things that we've been paying attention to over the last couple of years is this idea of feeling like I belong. And I feel like it sets the stage for part of this discussion, is that it should be shocking, I think, or at least concerning, for us to recognize that as a people, at the end of last year, half of us felt like I don't have a place in society, and half of us said I do. That's a problem. Now, it's 42%, that red line, as of this month, right now, of Americans saying that they don't feel like they have a place in society. Now, some of that can be driven by this is the groups that tend to say that highest level, younger people, but then you can see that there's different groups of dynamics here that are at play at the issue we're talking about today. Black Americans themselves, but then also in the rural, more white community, you have a different dynamic of people feeling like they don't belong. And as a society, we've asked this question, and we're tracking it the last 2 quarters. Is our culture, are we championing human needs above all else? I want to point to this 45%. We have almost half of America right now who feel like, our culture doesn't do that right now. Now, how much of that is an individual responsibility versus societal? We don't feel like corporate America or government's doing that. So one of the issues is our interactions with each other as people. So we did ask recently, just in this same level, to say, and this is self-reported, and these are interesting numbers because I think some of this might be intuitively obvious and some may be surprising, and it may be talking about an aspiration versus a reality. I leave that up to you to decide. But when we asked people across America with a representative sample, there's only 4 in 10 Americans who will tell us that they have a meaningful interaction with someone of a different race or ethnicity on a daily basis. I'm not suggesting if that's a good or bad thing. I'm saying that's an observation that's not happening. Now, seeing someone that's different than me, half of Americans claiming that, yeah, I see people that are different than me on a daily basis, but that means half of people don't. When you look at this by different groups, what's interesting is that when we look at by ethnicity, you do see that that those that are in the minority, Asian, Hispanic, and Black Americans, they're more likely to have a higher seeing and interaction, but these numbers weren't as starkly different as I might have expected the reality may be. But regionally, it does show. Does this tell us that this is an expectation and a hope or a current behavior? Not sure, but I'm trying to set the context as we go into this discussion of the why and societal dynamics. What was clear, though, is by age, the older you get, the less you interact generally and the less you interact specifically with people who are different than you in terms of race and ethnicity. And that's an interesting dynamic across the board that's evident. So the last one I'll show is, this one was interesting to me, is by party affiliation, because this topic, I guess similar but in more obvious ways than the COVID becoming a partisan issue, this topic can be and is often talked about as a partisan issue. And that's difficult for dialogue because this should be a human issue. This shouldn't be a political issue or socioeconomic. It should be a reality of a human issue. And so when we look at this by party, you see that both Democrats and Republicans report the same level of interaction. Independents a much lower level, which is interesting to kind of talk about. But I wanted to share that as a starting point for this discussion to give a little bit of context of what's going on in America.